Hello, welcome back to the channel. Today we're doing a dramatic painting of a steam engine. I wanted to paint this to show you that with just a few simple techniques you can create real drama in a painting, and it can be done by a complete beginner and it could be very effective. So let's press on with our painting, but of course I can't do that unless I'm wearing the right headgear. That's better. All aboard. Time to paint a dramatic scene in oils. Try the hat, isn't it?
So here's my canvas, 16 by 20. I painted it with some black gesso and left it to dry, but you could also use black acrylic. I'll also be painting a train today, and I've got 3 different sizes to choose from. Image is on Pixabay. I need enough room to allow for some steam as well. I'll cut them out of this sheet of paper and then attach them to the canvas with a bit of blue tack and stand back. So, what size shall we use? The train will be the focal point for this dramatic painting. I think we might go for a slightly bigger one. I'll put it well down the canvas and allow plenty of room for some steam above. We'll also have some very faint background trees. If that looks familiar, it's actually from this painting. Yes, it was my little test sample that I used to attach to my canvas. I'm reusing that piece of paper with some graphite just scrubbed onto the back. Now, let's transfer a rough outline to the canvas. I've used a little piece of masking tape here just to position it. A little too high, maybe a little lower? No, I think about there. But it's definitely in the lower half of my painting, about 1/3 up from the bottom. To transfer the outline, I'm simply going to use a biro, but my canvas is, well, a little springy. I'll just use a little notebook behind the canvas to support it, that can press nice and firmly and create a little bit of an outline. Let's see what it looks like. A little bit faint, you can just about see the graphite has left an imprint. That looks a bit better. How did I do that? Was it magic? Ding! No, I simply used a white graphite pencil and just went over the outline. Let's take a moment to look at perspective. What I call a natural perspective is the lines I've used from the photograph. If they move a little closer together, here it looks like I'm looking down onto the railway track. If I move further out to the sides, it looks like we're laying on the railway tracks. So, you see, you pick what you want for your dramatic effect. I'm simply going to go with what I call the natural perspective, as though I was standing on the track. I'm going to be using acrylic paint for an underpainting. You see white acrylic and some black gesso, but hang on, it also said the word acrylic. There's a little confusion between acrylic and gesso. Today, they're very similar. They're also interchangeable. You can mix one with the other. Gesso tends to be a more matte effect, and acrylic tends to be slightly more shiny. Here you see, I've made a dull grey colour by mixing some black and white. I'm using a little bristle brush here just to sort of tap in the suggestion of some foliage. Here you see my reference photograph, a limited palette painting. It's either dusk or very early dawn. So I'll keep my underpainting very muted. We'll see later on if I've taken that a step too far. I'll build this up in layers, standing back regularly. Don't want anything too bright at this stage. Here you see, I carry on adding more detail, maybe to the embankment, even a little detail down between the railway lines. As I say, don't get it too bright too soon. In the reference photograph, you can just about make out some trees and bushes at the sides of the embankment. But again, this is all very low key. I'll add a few just using some thinned black acrylic. Or is that gesso? As I said, it doesn't matter which one you use, they all work well together. I'll add a few to the left and a few extras to the right and leave it all to dry. To increase the dramatic effect, the foreground will just be black. no detail.
So that's it, background finished. Let's get on and slap some oil paint on it. But hang on just a moment. You see folks, I'm going to glaze this with colour. I'm going to use a nice sort of blue-black colour for it, maybe even a hint of mauve. And if there's one thing I've learned about doing glazes, it tends to obscure some of these more sort of subtle backgrounds. I'm afraid most of what I've done there is just for layout. If I put oil colour on this, it'll disappear. So I need to amplify these colours a little more. I need to make the little pale greys a little brighter. So don't get in a hurry. Repeat the last step and see if you can boost some of those colours. If they're too bright, it won't matter. We can tone them down with the glaze. Let's get back to the underpainting. And by the way, did you notice there I mixed acrylics and gessos? They seem to work quite well on my canvas, so let's carry on painting.
Let's go back over some of this acrylic and give it a little boost. As I said, once it dries, it sort of tends to dry much more dull, and it needs these little bits of extra acrylic just to make it stand out a little more. I'll even add a few little dabs so I know where the railway lines are going to be, but don't make that too solid. That's bright enough, isn't it? Well, we'll see. Here you see my canvas has dried completely, and it's time to apply some of this Bob Ross Liquid Clear Oil Paint. This is a wet on wet oil painting technique. The liquid clear, of course, is transparent, and I'm going to apply a thin coat with this old Bob Ross brush with a little orange tip on its handle. That's to remind me it's been well used. Here you see, I want to scrub on a thin coat. Just in case, apply a thin coat. Yes, I said it twice because I'm afraid some people just put on a little too much. I won't put too much over the train. I don't want to scrub it too hard because, well, I might just rub off that graphite. You see, I've done the first half of my canvas. I'll complete the canvas and finish it off with some long flat strokes to even out the surface before dry cleaning that 1-inch brush because I'm going to be using it again. This is what we call a limited palette painting. There's only a few colours. To get us started, I put out some Prussian blue and some black. I'll brush mix these on the palette, create a deep sort of bluish tone, more to the black side than the blue side. These are transparent colours, and as you see, when I scrub them over the white acrylic, it tones them right down, but they pick up a sort of blue-grey colour. But how do I know if I've got enough on there? Simple test is to use your fingertips. You want to see a good strong blue-black colour. I wonder if that acrylic was bright enough in the end. I'm going to start my painting with these brushes, a nice fan brush, a very good condition 1-inch Bob Ross landscape brush and a filbert brush. I might add another brush later on. And of course, I'll be using my fingers to do some blending, but that's optional. Again, here's my reference picture, and I want to start working on the sort of silhouette of the lovely sort of steam that surrounds the train. Again, for dramatic effect, I want to surround the area which is the focal point. I'll be using what I call seascape white. That's white mixed with a tiny drop of yellow ochre. It's maybe a little too yellow, so I'm going to put some titanium white with it, but it's definitely not pure white. I'm going to brush mix this into some of the blue-black colour. Again, I want to tone this down. I want a sort of more grey-blue colour. See this area in the background first, behind the train. I'm going to go back here and use the corner of my fan brush to scrub. But top tip, don't go too bright too soon. I'm afraid you'll hear me say that more than once today. I've toned the colour down with a little more black and I'll scrub over this. I really want just a hint of colour in the background. I'll use that 1-inch brush and I'll blend just on the corner. The blue-black colour already on the canvas will help tone things down. If you're worried about losing some of the outline, here's a neat little trick for you. Simply use your palette knife, rest it against the edge of the painting, and that way you can sort of protect that area. Just scrub against it. There you have. The outline has been preserved. I won't worry too much about this because I'm going to be doing a little bit of a tidy up later on in the painting. Once again, I let the colour run out the further I move away from the train. Yes, I definitely think those acrylic trees and bushes are really very understated, but in the reference photograph you can just about see them. I want to leave this centre section empty for that big plume of steam from the funnel. So work from the back forwards. So try and work the outside edges first. Here you see, I'm still using the fan brush, but just on the corner and scrubbing in a little bit of colour. I add a little, I check my reference photograph, and if I need to make some adjustments, I can. Here as I blend the steam, the area I'm concentrating on mainly is here, the shadow between one layer of steam and the next. I want to keep that nice and dark. It acts as a separator between one section of my painting and the next. Here you see I started to work on the right hand side as well. Little bits of steam, lots of blending and lots of standing back. I'll repeat this process over and over to build up the painting, layer by layer. This was a challenging painting for me to video, so I had to compensate the exposure now and then, so you'll see my painting get lighter and darker. It's the only way I could make things visible for you. Here you see I want to strengthen the edge of that steam. It looked a little bit sort of soft, so I'm using my filbert brush and just scrubbing in some paint to create more of a sharpened edge. Playing around with paint and different brushes to achieve different effects is all part of the learning experience. I'm learning as I'm going, but I've had lots of practice because this is the same technique I would do for clouds, scrubbing on some colour and blending. So this is great practice. Sometimes different subjects need different skills adapted from other techniques that you've already tried. I think I might actually stick to using a filbert brush for these steam clouds. I think the fan brush was just a little too flyaway. Once again, lots of blending. But sometimes I overdid it. I put on too much light. Luckily, I still have my 1-inch brush that I started with. It's got some Prussian blue and black on it, and I can use that to blend out the base of these steam clouds. This way I can cut back on the over-brightened areas of my painting. I want to keep this part completely clear at this stage, and I'm using almost no paint on my brush just to indicate a sketch. Now I know where that main plume of steam is coming up, I can think about adding some detail to the sides. Once again, I'm using almost no paint on my brush. It's like sketching with a dry brush. You see, I put a blob that was a little too bright. I'll gather that up and blend it into my painting. Now, it's quite easy to get a little sort of carried away with this steam and to try and put in more detail than you need. So, as you add layers of steam, keep looking at your reference photograph. As long as you're capturing a good likeness, that's all you need to do. But don't try and get all of it. This little piece of steam is very important. It forms the edge of that main plume coming from the stack on the front of the steam train. Here in the centre, there's less detail, and I can't resist it. I've got to get my fingers in there to do a little bit of blending. I'll come back and just make these a little stronger. This is definitely one of the more dramatic parts of the painting. Going back and just picking out a few touches of the steam you want to increase the brightness on. You can see how I use my fingers to apply paint and just sort of smudge and smear it. But my canvas had begun to dry and it was definitely getting sticky. very tacky, actually hard to paint with your fingers. So I used a brush. I found that just worked better. Once again, add a little, stand back, smudge it out. Think about the light coming from behind the train, creating this dramatic silhouette effect. Here you see I've gone over the edge of the outline of the train. A bit of a pickle, but it's an easy fix using a cotton bud. I make it just damp in some odorless thinners, but only just damp. You can see I wipe most of it off on my hands so you can see how much I'm removing. Because the canvas is almost completely dry at this stage, it means I can just gently rub away any excess paint. Once I reveal the outline of the train again, I stand back and realise something isn't quite aligned. It looks a little out of balance. But let this dry completely before you attempt to do any more painting. As you see, I think there's a problem here on the left hand side. I think I should have put the steam a little further under the train. I'm using a small flat synthetic brush for this. I'll just go in and rub in a little bit of the extra steam that I need. And that's it. I think it's much more symmetrical now.
So here's my painting so far, and as you saw in that last little sequence, the repairs were very easy, just a damp cotton bud, and I just went over some of these edges and reshaped the little steam train. In fact, this whole painting is really quite straightforward. Sort of smoke and mirrors, or is that steam? Sometimes complicated looking paintings turn out to be the easiest ones we do. And I think this is something that almost anybody could have a really good go at. Even a complete beginner should make a really good attempt on this painting. Anyway, let's carry on with our painting and see if we can turn the lights on. Mind the gap.
It's time to put some lights on the train. I take some Indian yellow and some bright red and mix them together to make a warm orange colour. I'll also add a dab of white to the side. I want a sort of very pale yellow-orange tone. There. The next step, I use a little flat brush for it, and I bring it to a nice flat straight edge. I need to steady my hand using this marl stick, but you can use whatever comes to hand. And I want to create the effect of some light beams. I start off by making a little cross right through the centre of where I believe the light is on the front of the train. I make the arms of the cross a little different in length. I then add some more crisscrosses through the centre to give a starburst effect. When you stand back, this is very effective and looks just like the light streaming from the front of the train. And I'll add a couple more lights a little lower down. Same technique, a little crisscross. There. I'm using that same small flat brush, but this time with a slightly more orange tone of paint. This technique is called dry brushing. It's where there's so little paint on the brush that it almost feels dry to the touch. But against a slightly sticky canvas, it takes off just enough paint to give a tiny, tiny suggestion of light. But once again, this wants to be very subtle. Remember, the main objective is for you to really focus on the steam and that bright front light. So keep this a little bit more sort of subdued. When you stand back, you really get the impression of the steam engine roaring towards you down the tracks, steam bellowing from its furnace, the hiss and the sound, the atmosphere. It's a real drama. Now, just to add a little sparkle of light on the tracks. I've looked carefully at the reference photograph and I see the embankments either side of the track, a little hint of light, referred light from the locomotive. I've gone back into some of that very orangey yellow colour. Again, not much paint on my brush. Just here and there, I'm going to suggest a tiny drop of the orangey light from the engine or maybe from the front light. Once again, just a hint here. You can now see some of the acrylic we put on in the background. is just visible. It ended up being just about right in the end. I pick out just one or two little bits of the ground. Maybe the edge of a bush or two as well. Smudging as I go. As we work forward in the painting, I want to add a little suggestion of light on the railway sleepers. Closer to the engine, they want to be close together, and as they come towards you, they want to be slightly further apart. And with this, I think we have a completed painting. A dramatic scene that anyone could paint, even a beginner.
So there we have it, a dramatic painting in oils of a steam train that even a beginner could complete. Now, don't move because there's some more dramatic paintings coming right along. Happy painting, people. Move down the carriage now. I'm going to have to wear this hat more often, I think.